Welcome to Sales for Nerds. I'm your host and chief nerd, Ruben Swartz. If you started a business because you love serving clients but realized you didn't like the sales and marketing aspect of running that business so much, this is the podcast for you. Sales and marketing doesn't have to suck. It can actually be a lot of fun. And on this show, we're going to teach you how to connect instead of network, teach instead of market, help instead of sell, so you can keep serving people even while you're building your pipeline and growing your business. Now let's get to it. Welcome to Sales for Nerds. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Alistair McDermott. He is somebody who helps consultants become the recognized authority in their field. And he is, in fact, the host of the Recognized Authority podcast, where I was grateful to be a guest last year, or was it last year? Some time ago. And he's going to share with us how you can take your expertise and turn it into authority to make business development easier, not only to get more clients, but to get better clients. Alistair, welcome to Sales for Nerds. What do you have in your glass?
Awesome. It's great to be here. You were on the Recognized Authority 18 months ago in episode 72, actually. And I have a very full tumbler here of Jameson crested whiskey, which isn't like a super posh whiskey. And I actually just have the empty bottle here to show you guys, but I wanted to show you what I was drinking. Let's see. I get that to focus there. Yeah. So this is it's just a nice kind of not bottom of the shelf, but not top shelf either, kind of middle of the range Irish whiskey. And I would typically drink an Irish whiskey, and I'm going to perpetuate all sorts of horrible Irish stereotypes here. But yeah, that's what I'm drinking.
They sound
So
like very
I have,
positive stereotypes.
yeah, I have a really nice whiskey, and I have a couple of drops of water in there to kind of release the flavors and things, and that helps. And that's what it is.
Awesome. And I have this bottle of, which I'm probably not saying right, Rokusan Japanese whiskey that I just picked up in Japan. And this was literally one of those, hey, I'm in the duty-free area and I have some yen I need to spend. What do they have for whiskey that I can't get elsewhere? So here we are. Cheers. Welcome to Sales for Nerds.
Cheers and sláinte. Yeah, so and not a bad way to go with the Japanese whiskey. I don't think I've tried a Japanese whiskey yet, so I'll have to give that a go.
I've had a bunch and they do quite a nice job. And this one is really kind of got a lot of caramel and honey to it. Reminds me a little bit of Oban Scotch whiskey. Anyway, we probably shouldn't spend the whole time talking about our drinks, just part of it. Let's rewind a little bit and get to how did you become the recognized authority? I'm guessing that
Mhm.
wasn't your original life plan.
No, I mean, if you go back in the day, like I was proper, like if this is sales for nerds, I'm in the right place. I'm a proper nerd. Yeah, so like I have some Star Trek characters on the shelf behind me, and I started out of college software engineer. And my first job, I was a coder for assembler code and IBM mainframes. So it was real like zeros and ones and machine code and stuff like that. So that was my first job. And then I went to a company called Sun Microsystems, which is no longer with us, unfortunately. I was bought out by Oracle, but they had some really cool engineering, and I worked on their operating system, which is called Solaris. And so I was a software there for about 5 or 6 years. And then I realized that I was a terrible employee. So I decided that I wanted to not be an employee anymore. I wanted to start my own business. But when you start a small business or start a business coming from that background, I felt like I didn't have a lot of saleable skills at the time. And so I actually jumped over to search engine optimization because I had been doing a bit of that for people. So that's when I started out with my own business in 2007, I was selling SEO services, search engine optimization, which back then was actually quite technical. It's a little bit less so now because we've got much better tools,
Mhm.
but back then it was really quite technical. So it was useful to have that engineering background.
And how did you get your first clients?
I was lucky in that I had decided that I was going to in about 2004, 2005, I started working on some side projects for people, and I decided that I was going to try and ramp that up a little bit. So I didn't have everything planned out, but I did have one or two clients who helped me get through the first few months of paying rent and paying the bills. I was living on ramen for a while though. So, but I went to I went to the guy. I did a start your own business course, which is very typical for people starting a business here in Ireland. Is you go and you do one of these start your own business courses. A lot of them are funded by local enterprise offices and people like that here, government support agencies. And the guy who ran the course, uh, I I asked him, could I buy him lunch and pick his brains a little bit? And so I just picked his brains about some ideas about my own business while he was running the course. And that kind of paid out from it paid off for me because he actually reached out to me and told me about an event that was going to be going on where I could get a trade show where I could get a booth. And this booth, he knew because he knew the organizers, he knew that I could get it for pennies on the dollar, effectively because somebody had pulled out last minute. And he said, "Look, if you can turn up," I think he called me on Wednesday. He said, "If you can turn up on Friday, with with all your stuff for the booth, you'll get it for a steal." And so I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And that was my first foray into. So then I had to figure out, okay, what the hell am I doing with the trade show booth? So I got some posters printed and I brought my laptop. My sister helped me out. She came along, she put on a business suit and came along as a kind of a second body. And we were one of the busiest booths at this trade show. And so I actually had a huge amount of potential clients coming along and talking to me. Again, I didn't really know what to do with all of these leads that I had, but it was a place to start. And so the next thing after that I had to do was like, okay, I've managed to get myself this far, but now what do I do? Like I had zero business acumen at the time, and this was very much an engineer does business for at the gate. So I went and I found somebody else, and I said, I've got all of these contact information for people. But I don't know what the next step is. So and I got some advice from somebody else on the next step, which was to see what kind of offer I could put together and then start getting in touch with the people who'd been there.
And this turned into the SEO offering?
Yeah, so I started out selling SEO as a service to a lot of these kind of smaller businesses, and some of them, like a lot of them were ideal for the SEO offering, but a lot of the people I've been talking to simply didn't even have a website. So in fact, I ended up having to go back a step before that and actually start building websites for people. And ultimately, I decided to rename the business to Website Doctor. So Website Doctor was the original business, and that was my primary business brand for the next 14 years or so.
And what led you to pivot or evolve or whatever you want to call it into the recognized authority?
It was a realization that I came to way too slowly, that I had no kind of niche specialization whatsoever. So I was all things to all people. And like with Website Doctor, it was a generalist web agency. And so it was doing search engine optimization, building websites. Even at one point, I was offering Google ads, social media ads, helping people with social media campaigns, with content creation like blogging, all of that kind of stuff. We built websites we built an e-learning website for an international organization. We built e-commerce websites of all kinds. We built small business websites for mom and pop stores, and even did some work for a local franchise here. But they were all different. Every project was different. There was no specialization, and all of my marketing was done through referrals, word of mouth, and one day I realized, one day I wanted to start a podcast actually. And I'd been listening to podcasts for years, and I said, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. And I started planning my podcast. Now, I think I may inadvertently have a Guinness World Record here, because I started planning my podcast in July 2014 and I launched it in April 2021. So
that's longer than me. I thought I took a long time, but wow.
That's a lot of procrastination. But actually, it wasn't just procrastination. It wasn't just the fear, which like is quite normal to have some fear of starting something like that. But what it fundamentally uncovered was that I had a major problem strategically with my business, in that I had no strategy to my business. It was this kind of generalist positioning. and I didn't even know what positioning was at the time, really, and I was really frustrated because I was able to help my clients and I was getting good results from my clients as well, which was really frustrating. And I wasn't able to turn around and use those techniques for myself. And the things that were working for them were not working for me. And I really didn't understand this, why is this type of marketing that, for these like local businesses, like a local gym or a local restaurant, why is the marketing that works for them not working for me when I'm trying to market my web agency? And like it's very logical to me now, but back then I couldn't understand. Surely this is the same thing. It's all marketing, right? And then I realized, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. What's my podcast going to be about? Who's it going to be for? And I started planning this out, and I realized I don't know what it's going to be about. It's going to be about websites. Like, what does that look like? And then who's it going to be for? Well, it's going to be for business owners. And that is just the most horrible generic positioning or generalist positioning that you can have. And so it was the start of my foray down the rabbit hole of, oh, this specialization and niching down thing is actually quite important. Uh, so I went down that rabbit hole for a few years and eventually got to the point where I niched down and specialized. And yeah, that was the turning point and the start of the upward curve again, after some tough years and being very unclear about what the business direction was.
So you kind of followed the advice that you would give to your clients to make sure that you've got strong positioning that's going to do a lot of the work for you, so you don't have to do it all yourself.
Yeah, I mean, like the way that I think about it now, I put lead generation for expertise type businesses into three buckets. One is the default standard referrals and working word of mouth. And that is how 99% of businesses who are in this kind of B2B professional services space, that's how we operate.
Hmm.
The other buckets are inbound and outbound. Outbound is, all of the horrible stuff,
Hmm.
making cold calls, sending spammy emails, sending automated LinkedIn messages, all of that horrible stuff. And then inbound is for me, I see inbound as the holy grail, which is where you do some activities and people come to you somehow. They find you, stumble across you and your activities online. And they say, that person seems cool, that business seems cool, I'd like to work with you. It sounds like what the problem that I have is and what the solution looks like. So I'd like to reach out. And that for me was the holy grail, but like, how do you get there? And
Hmm.
that's where I started to learn more to the idea of authority marketing and becoming known as authority.
Yeah, and I think well, first of all, I want to rewind all the way back to your trade show days and your following up from the trade show, because you said a couple things there just in passing that I want to highlight as being really important, because I didn't do a good job with that, and I know a lot of other people don't as well. You asked for help. You called people up and you had conversations and you asked for help and you got help. Right? A lot of us are nervous to call and ask for help for various reasons, and therefore we struggle mightily and unnecessarily in many cases, when there are a lot of people out there who are happy to help if we just ask. And so I'm always telling people, hey, you already know a whole bunch of people who can help you. They may not write you a check, but they can help you in various really important ways. Make sure you're having conversations with them like Alistair did. So then if we go back to this point in the story, how did you become the recognized authority, right? How did you do this at sort of like the inception level of I've got to do this myself and then teach other people to do it?
Yeah. Okay. So again, I'm a huge believer in getting help. So I now, one of the things that I do now, I'm a coach. I help with the problems that they're facing. So like I'm a business coach, and I really strongly believe in that. And I've worked with many business coaches, but a key person was Philip Morgan. And Philip wrote several books now, I think at this point, about specialization and niching down. And so he was who I reached out to get help. And it gets very meta, but I also realized, hey, I'm reaching out to this person because they're the person who wrote the book. And so I'm looking at that as well, thinking, okay, reaching out to somebody because they wrote a book in it. So they're the expert on it. We have that phrase, he wrote the
Right.
book in it, she wrote the book in it. And I know you had a podcast episode recently. The concept of creating authority content like a book, and even the word author is in the word authority. It's all so wrapped up in itself. Yeah, so I reached out to Philip for coaching and to get some help with the niching down part. And we went through some exercises and he helped me to niche down. And it started out, it started out kind of a little bit broader. And you may know that the first 20 episodes of my podcast were called Marketing for Consultants. And that's because I hadn't really nailed down the exact positioning and branding. But I decided, okay, I need to start. So I picked Marketing for Consultants. And again, that's kind of engineered, an engineer does branding. But that's what I picked. So I went with that. And I figured as I do this, we'll figure out what the actual brand is. I knew that was like a placeholder. It's a pretty good placeholder at the time. I put a
Mm-hmm.
lot of effort into it, but I knew that I was eventually going to rebrand. And the great thing about, particularly with a podcast as your flagship, is it's very easy to rename a podcast, keep the same feed, keep the same episodes, but you just branding on top. There's no, it's not very difficult to do that. And so that's what I did. I picked Marketing for Consultants. I started and ran for 20 episodes, which was what's that, like 4 or 5 months or so. And then I realized actually it's about the authority part. And I put a bunch of words into a spreadsheet, all these different euphemisms for recognized authority, like for example, leader, um, the go-to person, words like that. And I went through them all, tested them, read them out to myself out loud. And I eventually said, okay, the one I'm really interested in here is the recognized authority, because the authority part I'm interested in and the recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Thought leader was interesting, or the thought leader, or the thought leadership, something around that. And I'm very interested in that concept as well. But I think that was more about the thinking and the leadership part, and not about the recognition part.
Mm-hmm.
Recognition piece of the puzzle is something that I'm really interested in, as helping people to become recognized, to become known, the marketing equation.
Yeah, I think it's a great brand. It conveys so much immediately. And I think things like thought leader are so sort of overdone these days. It's almost a turn off when someone's like, so and so is a recognized thought leader and blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, what does that actually mean?
It's one of those words where I think there's a lot of kind of negative connotations for some people around thought leadership. They see it as kind of, well, it's a little bit kind of BS. And I think a lot of, maybe this is kind of the engineering background, but I think a lot of stuff can just be semantics.
Mhm.
The difference between different terms that we use for the same thing. Sometimes it can be important, but sometimes it's just a very slightly different label that we're using for the same thing. And I don't like arguing semantics, because I think I think detail is important, but I also think that we need to be like we need to focus on what's truly important, and don't worry about the don't worry about the label on the outside of the jar, when what's really important is what's inside.
Sure. Though you also had a spreadsheet where you had all these different terms and you picked the one that you thought was the most compelling.
Yeah, so there's the nerd part again, right?
So
Yeah.
so you went from website doctor to marketing for consultants to the recognized authority, sort of as an evolution of your brand. If someone's listening to this thinking,
Yeah,
gosh, I'm kind of in the website doctor phase of my business, I would like to take things to the second or third level, what should people do next?
right. So first off, I do still actually run Website Doctor. I decided, and this is something that's interesting, when you've got brands like this, you can keep your your more generalist brand, still use that in your local market. But
Hmm.
if you want to expand into a more global marketplace, you need to stand out more, you have to have that more specific positioning. And that's because you're competing with everybody. With Website Doctor, I was only competing with 30 or 40 agencies in my local area, in
Okay.
kind of my local city and region. And so it's easy to compete. When you're generalist, it's easier to compete locally. But when I go up a level and say, okay, now I'm trying to compete in a more in a more global marketplace, that's where you need to be much more specific. And that's when having something that is a much more niche offering, and you can niche down in different ways. But having something that's more niche stands out because you are saying yes to a very specific small portion of the marketplace and
Sure.
saying no to everybody else.
Yep. Amen. So how do people actually go about doing that? Because what I find and what I went through myself was, okay, yes, it's very easy for me to give this advice to my clients, but for me, my business is a special snowflake and I don't want to exclude anybody and I don't want to blah, 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 blah. All right. If you're listening and you're having those fears right now, what do you say to those folks?
Well, if you're everything to everybody, you're nothing to nobody because you are not standing out from everybody else. You actually have to take a stand for what you believe in for and I don't mean that in a kind of a political sense, but just in okay, I'm going to pick this much smaller portion of the pool. And so what you can be a big fish in a pond rather than being a small fish out in the ocean. The thing is, there are usually if you pick the right niche, there are usually more than enough clients for everybody in the marketplace. So it's not a question of needing to have kind of broader, bigger nets to catch more fish. And I think I need to get away from the fish analogies now. But the when you niche down, what's happening is you first of all you can start to become known for what you do.
Mhm.
It's very difficult to become known as a generalist. It's
Right.
pretty much impossible because well, first off, you can have the problem like I had where you try and create content and everything that you create is kind of bland and jumping around
Mhm.
from subject to subject. You don't ever develop deep expertise in a specific topic because you're jumping around and the content that you're creating isn't good. So when you niche down, you it's much easier to create content because you're more focused. And also, when you start working on the same kinds of projects over and over again, it means that every new client that comes along is not a learning curve. Because when you're a generalist, typically every new client is a learning curve. And you start working with the same types of clients on the same problems over and over again. And you start to get this pattern matching, which is where you start to see, and it's like one of is it's like that the TV show where the movie where the guy was looking at the blackboard and suddenly he starts to see all the patterns as it jumps out of the chalkboard, um and something like that where you start to see the connections between things. You just start to get this much deeper understanding of the problems and the solutions, and that is where it actually becomes real thought leadership. I think is where you start to go beyond what the surface level is and you start to get really deep into it. And yeah, and when you are specialized and you say that you only serve a certain type of client who has a certain type of problem, when you do that, you are saying to everybody else. And so that feels terrifying. There's a lot of fears involved in niching
Mhm.
down. But the flip side of that is the people who are in that small group, they feel doubly, triply, 10 times that you were saying yes to them. They're
Right.
like, okay, this person gets it. This person gets me in the problem that I have. And this is all they do. And when you say, look, this is all I do all day, every day, I just deal with this one problem. Like we completely understand this when it comes to medical consultants, for
Right.
example, or lawyers,
Yep.
do you want to deal with the lawyer who is a generalist and deals with everything? Or do you want to deal with the one who just deals with the problem that you have very specifically? That's all they do all day, every day. And it's a no-brainer. And I think that particularly when it comes to expertise type businesses like consulting, where we have this option to be a bit more generalist, I think that we should take a lesson from the medical industry and from the legal industry where they go niche much more than we do. And that's where I think the real power is you become the go-to person or the go-to expert or the recognized authority on one topic.
I agree, and I just would say amen to all that. And I guess what I'm wondering is for somebody who is sort of like trying to cross the chasm, if you will. And Ellen Malcolm Moore, who's another guest of the show, she has a great phrase called niching up because people somehow like that helps people sometimes think of it as, hey, I'm not excluding people. I'm just going into more rarefied air where the people that I can ideally serve are hanging out and where they're going to be really excited to see me. How do you pick your niche? Is there a process that you go through, or do you just kind of stumble around until you figure it out?
Well, I think some people are very lucky in that on their journey to authority or on their journey in their business, they already niche down or have found their calling in some way. And some people do kind of stumble across it already in that way. But for many people, it can be like it was for me, where first of all you have to figure out, okay, this is actually a problem that I need to do something about. You get to that realization. And then you start to look at it and you say, oh, this is kind of terrifying because I'm going to be turning down business and I don't like that idea. And then you get past that and you say, okay, now how do I actually do it right? Well, the major ways that you can do it is horizontal and vertical. That's the kind of the major split. There are some other options as well. It's like platform specialization where you can specialize in a specific platform. But horizontal is where you take a problem, you say, I solve this problem. And vertical is where you say, I solve problems for this industry. And then you can merge both of those and you can say, I solve this problem for this industry. And so that's the kind of the big kind of that's kind of like the big overall view on it. And you can niche down then as much as you want. And different people have. I know David C. Baker has quantified it to some degree, where he said, there should be 200, at least 200 potential clients as businesses in the market that you're niching down to. For example, that's his rule. So I think that you can quantify it in that, or you can just play it by ear. You can test the waters. One thing that Philip Morgan talks about that I like, he talks about thinking of it as a test campaign, and I think that's a really great way to think about niching down. So you say, right, I'm going to like for example, I did with the recognized authority. I kept Website Doctor in the background. I didn't take down the website or anything. That's all still up there. I was still servicing existing clients, but I started the podcast as a test campaign, and then I built the website. Well, I built the website around that, and you know, but it was a test campaign to see, okay, is this working? And you can see, I know two people who I've had as guests on my podcast, both of whom picked the wrong niche to start with. And what do? They just figured out, okay, this isn't working for me, and they went and they picked something else. Like that's what happens. It's not the end of the world. You're not married to the niche. You can reverse course, change things. So I think that if you think of it as a test campaign, say, I'm going to test this for 60 days, 90 days, and see how this goes, see if this feels right to me. Do I like these people? Do I like working on this problem? Whatever that is. And like that's a way forward is, what's the problem I want to work on? Who do I want to work with? And one exercise that I take people through now is analyzing past clients. And so I've got a spreadsheet for everything, but I have a spreadsheet where you list past projects, past clients that you've worked in, and put in. I can share this with you. It's something I share with people. You can put in what was their ability to pay in terms of like, did they have decent budgets? How much did I like working on the project? Did they have respect for me? Was it fun? And then you can put in your last 20 projects in there, and then start looking for the patterns there. Oh, it's really interesting. I see that the people who I like working with most, and for me, I realized it was expertise type businesses that I liked working with. So I did this for myself, and I realized, okay, I like working with people who have these expertise type businesses. In fact, I think they may probably call themselves consultants, and that was the pattern that I could see. And I like working with those people. I did not like working on e-commerce websites, for example. Wasn't really a big fan of working for not-for-profit agencies or organizations either, usually because they had a lot of stakeholders involved. And so even though, ironically, the budgets for those projects were sometimes a bit higher than for businesses, uh, there was just too many too many bosses to be, too many stakeholders to be dealing with. And so I could see that pattern when I put this into the spreadsheet. So I realized, okay, these are the people who I would like to work with. What's the problem that I want to work on? And what are all the things that I could do for these people? So for example, I could build websites for consultants. And in fact, websites for consultants was one of the domains that I bought. And then I was thinking, okay, well, it's actually the marketing aspect. So it's not the website per se, it's more about the marketing, and it's more about type of inbound marketing that I like doing. And so what's that really? Well, I started out as marketing for consultants, but then I realized it's really authority marketing is what we're talking about. It's creating content. And I really like that idea of authority building authority through content. And I realized a lot of the phrases that people are using here, well, thought leadership is one of those, and the recognized authority is another. So that's kind of, that's joining the dots between going all the way from me wanting to niche down to here's the recognized authority.
Okay. And that's the kind of process that people could follow. And it's similar in some ways to what I suggest people do. I always tell them, put your favorite clients into Mimeren and call them up and have a conversation. Here's an outline of some questions you might want to ask, and try to understand their words. Make sure that you have their words for what it is that you do and why you're different and all that good stuff. And again, the patterns will emerge after you have enough conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a process for positioning, 5 steps of positioning. I'll just read out the names, and that will give you a very quick overview. Step 1 is past client analysis, and step 2, skills and interests assessment. So what are you good at doing? It's the usual 3 or 4 overlapping Venn diagram of what you're good at doing, what do you find fulfilling, what skills do you have, maybe what's the opportunity in the world. And then step 3 is small scale research, which is about validating your ideas. And that's usually about reaching out and having conversations with people, which is just like what you're talking about here. And having, like, I think that you can, it can never hurt. It can almost never be a negative, apart from the opportunity cost of the time it takes to make the call. It can almost never be a negative to just talk to more of your previous clients. Just getting a call and say, hey, I'm just reaching out. I don't have anything to sell you. I'm not trying to pitch you anything. I just want to have a conversation about, how are you getting on? Like, what problems are you seeing right now? What's keeping you up at night? Is there, and just learning from what the pain points are they're dealing with, just see how they're going. It's a great way to also build relationships, and in a kind of a natural way. Next step is to actually crafting some test positioning. And I'm a huge fan of keeping it really simple. I have a very simple positioning statement of, I help these people solve this problem, or I help these people get this result. And you can have all sorts of variations on that. You can add the process or methodology that you use, and you can add the benefit. So we help these people solve this problem by doing this so that they can get this benefit. And you can take that formula and just stick in some different options. And in fact, I have a spreadsheet of my positioning history going back to 2009 that has all of the different position statements that I've tested over time.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I recommend people, go back and check on your positioning, every 3 months, because your positioning statement is probably tweaking and changing. We wordsmith it over time as we learn more. And for me, the positioning statement is the foundational piece of all of your marketing. And so it's important to go back. And then step 5 in my process is to validate and iterate. So validate it by testing it with people, talking to people. Somebody says, what do? You tell them your positioning statement. I help these people solve this problem. And just see, how does that resonate? In fact, I did this recently at a trade show. It wasn't a trade show. It was one of these events where people had trade shows, and then I was invited to give a talk about AI, of all things. And so it was local business authority were running this, and they didn't actually have anybody in the local area who could speak about AI. So something I've been experimenting with a bit. But one thing that you can do when you meet people at these, because you meet 15, 20 different people, is you can actually test different versions of your positioning statement and just see how does it land, So and refine this kind of continuous refinement. So that's the process that that I would recommend that people take to positioning and to niching down. I think it's super important. Like it was transformative for me.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I don't want to turn this back onto me, but as far as I know, Mimeren is the only CRM that has a page where you go through this exercise, because there's no VP of sales to hand you the positioning. You have to come up with it yourself when it's your business. And like you, I found this is where people were struggling. They couldn't create a lead magnet because they didn't know who they were creating it for. And then I realized, well, even if they can create a lead magnet, if their website doesn't sound like it aligns with a lead magnet, no one's going to get to the lead magnet because they're not going to understand what the site's about. Everything needs to be built on that foundation of the positioning.
Yeah, I mean, once you've got that positioning statement, it should be on your website homepage, your about page. Your services should reflect it. Your LinkedIn profile headline, your summary, like it should be baked in everywhere. Your LinkedIn banner image,
Right.
all like it should be throughout all of those. And it's okay if they don't all match up perfectly. And what happens is they tend to kind of splinter a little bit over time. Like if you go to my LinkedIn, it's probably not exactly the same as it is on my, on my website and my podcast. If you go to the podcast page, but it's going to be pretty similar, you know. And it's only when you have major strategic changes that you need to make sure, okay, now it's really important to go and make sure we tick all the boxes, change it everywhere.
Right.
Um, but having that positioning, I think that it's important to. So why this is important is because when we are doing this type of marketing, this kind of inbound marketing, where we want people to find us, they're not coming to us where they've just been given a warm referral. So they're not coming to us with that word of mouth warm referral. So they don't have the same level of trust
Mm.
as somebody who their best mate just said, yeah, you got to talk to Ruben, you got to talk to Alistair because they're brilliant at this. So they haven't got that. And so when they find you, it has to be really clear what you do, that
Yep.
you're the person to help them. And then you have to have something there. And this is where the content piece comes in. You have to have something there that actually demonstrates your expertise, shows that you know and understand the problem and the solution. And,
Right.
and that's the key piece. And this was where I knew I needed to create that content for Website Doctor, but I didn't know what the content was that should create. And that was the part that really frustrated me when I started out, because I was trying to create this podcast because I knew a lot about podcasting even then. I joined a group called Podcast Incubator, and I had planned out my podcast. I'd even got to the point where I had recorded. I'd hired people to record the voiceover intros and everything, but I couldn't actually launch the podcast because I didn't have a specific enough niche for it, and so that was super frustrating. But in order to create content that isn't bland and that isn't so generalist or generic, you have to have that niche, and that's why it comes back to having the niche part. So it's all intertwined. I think you have to have the niche, and then you have to start creating content on that niche topic.
Okay, great. And I want to tie back into a couple other things that you said. One, the three buckets of marketing. And I think having this strong positioning not only helps you with the inbound, but it also makes you much easier to refer and to get the right referrals. So I think for people who are thinking, well, gosh, I am referral based, I can't just jump over to inbound. This is going to help your referral based business immensely. Even if you never do the inbound stuff, you got to do it anyway. And the other thing I thought was really interesting, you were talking about a gentleman whose name I can't quite remember, but you're saying, you got to have 200 clients plus or 200 plus prospects in your niche. And most people are out there thinking, gosh, I need tens of millions or something like that, that you can never, ever service in dozens of lifetimes. And I think, heck, even if it's less than 200, if it's two and you go get both of them, you can always expand your niche later. But
Yeah, and by the way,
generally it's, go
yeah,
ahead.
that was David C. Baker,
Thanks.
and he wrote the book called The Business of Expertise. I had him on the podcast back around episode 40 or so. So that's not the exact podcast episode, but in and around there. He is like he has a super podcast with Blair Enns, Two Bobs, and yeah, he talks about this all the time. The way that I personally think about it, and I'm holding a tumbler glass that is still mostly full of whiskey, and I drink some of this. But the way I think about this in terms of how much business is out there. So let's say you and I, Ruben, are competing for the same clients, right? And the two of us, all we need to do is we need to fill up our glass, and we go and we stand under the Niagara Falls, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter if we're standing side by side, both of us are going to fill up our glass.
Yep.
That's how much, like, there's a lot of business out there. So this is why I think, like, people who are competing, if you're competing with a direct competitor, you're almost never actually directly competing. Maybe McDonald's and Burger King, at some high level are competing, but they probably even have different clientele, different customers. So I think that thinking about competition and the size of marketplaces, I think that we are, particularly when you're niche down, that you can be the more you niche down. The other thing is the less you're competing with the person next to you.
Mhm.
And so when you're a generalist, you're competing with everybody. That's the other
Right.
issue. You're competing with everybody else who's a generalist. Whereas when you niche down, like you get very specific, you can then start to do other things, by the way. You can start to, apart from being able to do content marketing and authority marketing by creating content, which for nerds and introverts like me is a really great way. In fact, the best way to do marketing. Imagine if your marketing was, sitting and writing text into a word processor and then just posting that online. And that's your marketing. That is a far better way of doing marketing for me than, Facebook ads or Google ads or, some other type of, having to post lots of posts on social media. For me, this is like the perfect marketing for an introvert. And doing that kind of marketing and that kind of sales where people arrive already pre-sold. So they have, if somebody comes to me and they've listened to 150 episodes of my podcast, I don't need to sell to them.
Right.
They arrive pre. It's more, can you help me, and where do I pay? That's the conversation, and that is why inbound is the holy grail for me, compared to outbound, which I simply wouldn't do.
Yep.
That's just for me. And then referral based networking. The problem with referrals is sometimes you have to work quite hard for them, and then people refer you wrong clients or people who aren't quite right. And you also then sometimes get referrals where it's not a good fit, but there's nothing else in your pipeline. And you kind of feel like you have to take it, and so you kind of get forced down into this kind of more generalist role, even if you didn't want to. So, and I feel a bit like Oliver in Oliver Twist, please, sir, can I have some more?
Mm.
Where you have to go beg for referrals when the pipeline starts to up. So that's why I like band, where you can you create content, you write a book, you create YouTube videos, or you create a podcast, whatever way you like to create content. And that content, it can be as simple like what we're doing here today. We're just having a conversation, and we're having a conversation, yeah, with videos and
And
microphone
whiskey.
and whiskey, and we're just like this is marketing, and how good is that? I think that's a far better way for somebody like me to do marketing than some of the other horrible stuff that I see people having to put themselves through. So that's why doing inbound marketing was so important for me to figure out, because I don't have the personality for the other types of marketing and sales.
Well, and you come from IBM assembly coding and working on Solaris and all that. I mean, that really takes me back. So if people like what they're hearing, where can they find you to learn more?
Well, if you're listening to us in a podcast player, then just search for the Recognized Authority podcast, and that will, there's 150 odd episodes, I think 155 at the moment, and every one of those episodes, including episode 72 with Ruben Schwartz, stress-free consulting proposals. Every one of those episodes is evergreen, so there's no like you can listen to all of them. They'll all be relevant for you. I think if you're a listener to Sales for Nerds, I think that you'll like to recognize authority. So that's the best place to find me.
Awesome. And I agree. I love the podcast even before I went on. So, Alistair, thank you so much. I know it's getting late for you in Ireland, but thanks for joining me, and cheers.
Cheers, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for listening. Drop an iTunes review or a review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you've got a friend who would benefit from this episode,